Hey y'all, I'm Caleb Watson, and I want to tell you the tale of two managers. First manager was from when I was in high school. My first job at Dairy Queen, where I was the Blizzard Wizard. I could sling out blizzards with the best of them, and I could make chicken baskets pretty well, if I do say so myself, and it was largely because of my manager, George. He was strict, calculated, but efficient, and he showed me exactly what I needed to do to be successful within his framework. It's honestly impressive in retrospect how good he was at staffing, because we always seemed to be well staffed, well run, and keeping in mind that Dairy Queen was mainly high schoolers working there, that's pretty impressive. The other side of this was my first manager outside of college. So my first big boy job at Redmond Marketing, the CEO, Jim Bailey. So this man was eccentric, he was a big personality, but he loved his people. My first time meeting him, I introduced myself and said, "Hey, I'm Caleb Watson," and he goes, "Caleb Watson, Jim Bailey. I thought my day couldn't get any better, but then I met you." And I thought he was joking, but it turned out that's who he was. He loved people, but even more so, he was passionate, and he loved when people were passionate. And he did everything to instill confidence and empowerment in his employees to build up that passion. So I look at Jim Bailey and I look at George, and I think about this study from the Annenberg Institute where they said education, teachers, is at a 50-year low in terms of satisfaction teachers have with their profession. How does that exist? And I think about the way George managed, and I think about the way Jim managed, and I think between those two, and not just comparing management but leadership, we could find some answers to why the Annenberg Institute found that information. George, when I was in high school, was not very, let's say, open to new ideas. So when we made a sundae, we'd have to put in ice cream, then hot fudge, either pumped or ladled, and then nuts. And the station we had at our Dairy Queen went ice cream, and then nuts, and then hot fudge. As you can see, it wasn't a natural order. You'd have to go to the ice cream machine, then to the hot fudge, then to the nuts. So I suggested to him, rather proud because I was 16 and thought I had a good idea, "Hey, how about we do the ice cream, then the hot fudge, then the nuts?" And he shot it down immediately. I was so discouraged, being a 16-year-old who thought he had a good idea, and he didn't even tell me why. He just shut me down, and from that point forward, I didn't love working for Dairy Queen as much. I felt like a cog in a system. I didn't feel like I had ownership. And the flip side of this, we have Jim Bailey. Jim Bailey was an empowerer. He was a man who wanted his people to feel like they were a part of the organization and part of the family. When I was working at Red Moon for just 6 months in, I felt like we had an opportunity to build our web page design part of our business. It wasn't really a business we had, but I know we had some employees who had talents, and I didn't think he knew that we had those type of talents within our organization. I went to him, pitched the idea, because they had an open door policy, and 15-second, 30-second pitch, he goes, "That sounds fantastic. Figure out the best way to do it and get back to me." I said, "All right, sounds good." I turned around, went to two of the employees who had web page design experience. I built up a slide deck, and boom, we had an idea. We went off and pitched it back to him, and that started our web page business, what ended up being a pretty large portion of the business to this day. Now, from there, I was all in. I was empowered, but I felt like I was part of the company, and I wanted to make sure that everyone I work with felt that way too. And I think about the three pillars of three drivers of an organization, and how 50 years ago is different from now. How come 50 years ago teachers were more happy than they are now? And I think in the 21st century there's different ways of management, but not just management, leadership that we have to look at. I think about what Jim Bailey did well, and one is recruitment. You know, when I was 23 years old, I was allowed to recruit. I was allowed to bring in a new employee to my department, which was wild. The fact that I was trusted to bring in a new employee. It wasn't some top decision where the executives had to make a decision. They trusted me to do something. I, being someone who loved the company, sought someone who would also fit well for the company. Our CEO thought, who knows who's going to fit better on a team than the people who are in that team every day? And he was right. We got to hire some great people. We didn't have issues with turnover, and we didn't have issues with hiring the wrong people. The next thing that I know Jim Bailey did extremely well was shaping a culture that fostered internal accountability. So internal accountability, Hargraves and Shirley have a good way of putting it. They did a study in Canada where they looked at an organization or school system that heavily focused on internal accountability, and they said this: internal accountability occurs when individuals and groups willingly take on personal, professional, and collective responsibility for continuous improvement and success for all students. Think about Dairy Queen. There was a lot of external accountability. If I thought George was around, I'd make sure I did everything perfectly because I didn't want him to catch me. But if I knew he was out getting some more hamburger buns from the store, I would definitely sneak a handful of cookie dough and maybe take some time on my phone before doing something more productive. That was a culture of external accountability, whereas at Red Moon Marketing, I wanted to make sure everyone was their best. If someone struggled, I was going to build them up, and together we were going to support each other and grow as a team. The last thing that I know Jim Bailey did better than most was being a learning leader. He was continually deepening his learning. He wanted to learn, and he realized that if he was going to make a difference, he had to be an example for his employees. He knew if he said we had to grow in a certain area, he was going to grow himself. And no one doubted that Jim Bailey was someone who would do what he said you should do. He would practice what he preached. John Maxwell, who's an author who focuses heavily on leadership, said if you're a leader, do everything you can to grow yourself and create the right environment for others to grow. And I think this is definitely true as we look at school systems, as we look at local restaurants, as we look at companies. I think we can all relate to an organization where we don't know if our manager is doing what they say we should do. We might be Dairy Queen, where I was sneaking off to eat cookie dough because I didn't think my manager was around. But how many times do you get a little bit more lax when someone's not walking by your cubicle, right? There's a lot of external accountability, and there's not a lot of trust in the leadership practicing what they preach. But why isn't this a thing? Well, change is hard. And I'd like this right here. I'd commonly say, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again. I think some of us might be like this cartoon. What if we don't change at all and something magical just happens? I think some of us might predict that, and that's how we get to a situation where teacher satisfaction is at a 50-year low. Michael Fullen, who wrote Coherence and is an expert in building organizational frameworks that work, said that change really isn't as hard as we thought if we capture people's interests and give them enjoyable, worthwhile experiences. Think about Jim Bailey. That's a person who gave me a worthwhile experience. That's a person who got his employees to buy in. Now, George was a very good manager. We had a very good organization, and that Dairy Queen did very well. However, there wasn't a lot of people who felt empowered or passionate. I know it was just Dairy Queen, but I think we can relate to that. And I challenge you to be a little more like Jim and a little less like George, because together we can do it. Thanks.